All right, listen. While you were watching bombs drop in Iran last week, your government quietly admitted something they've never admitted before. They published their own financial report, their balance sheet. And something in that report made the former Auditor-in-Chief of the United States government use a word he has never used in his entire career. He didn't describe the U.S. as in debt. He didn't say we're running a deficit. No, he said insolvent. And I'm going to show you why that word, it changes everything. Because learning that the government is in debt, that's not news. Your neighbor knows that. Your grandkids probably know that. The government has been in debt your entire adult life. What we're talking about here is what made the former Comptroller General break 30 years of professional restraint. He couldn't hold it back any longer. You know, when you understand the difference between being in debt and insolvency, you're going to want to check two documents before you go to bed tonight. His name is David Walker. He was the U.S. Comptroller General from 1998 to 2008. He ran the Government Accountability Office, the agency that audits the federal government. He used to sign these reports. And look, I'm just a guy who buys houses for a living, but I know the difference between debt and insolvency because I've been on both sides of the table in the last 20 years or so and $50 million in deals. You can have a mortgage and be perfectly fine. That's debt. You owe money, but you can service it. Your income covers your payments. You're solvent. But if your mortgage is 8 times what everything you own is worth, and 23 cents of every dollar you earn goes just to the interest, and you're borrowing more money every month just to make the minimum payment, and your income isn't growing fast enough to keep up, that's not debt anymore. That is insolvency. That's the moment your accountant stops saying, hey, tighten the belt, Matt, and starts saying, we need to have a different conversation. That's what David Walker just said for the first time about the United States government in Fortune magazine, in writing, backed by the Treasury's own numbers. Now, let me show you those numbers because they're worse than you think. This is the financial report of the United States government, fiscal year 2025, published March 19th, available at fiscal.treasury.gov. Total assets, $6.06 trillion. Total liabilities, $47.78 trillion. But here's where it gets interesting. There's a second set of numbers they report separately, off the main balance sheet. They're called the Statement of Social Insurance. This is where the government puts its unfunded obligations for Social Security and Medicare, things it has promised to pay but has no money set aside for. And that number, $88.4 trillion. It jumped $10 trillion in a single year. It's like getting your credit card statement and seeing that you owe $47,000. Ugly, but hey, you knew about it. Then you find out your spouse has a second card you didn't know about, $88,000. You can't just say, hey, honey, that's your problem, handle it. No, same household, joint responsibility. The U.S. government is your spend-happy spouse in that scenario. Here, let's do the math. We've got $47 trillion in debt that we know about. $88 trillion we just learned about. And add them together, we've got $136 trillion. Now we have 131 million households in this country. So if we divide it by the number of households, that's over $1 million per household. Your household. And here's why that number matters to you personally. Right now, tonight, go to ssa.gov, log in, find your projected monthly Social Security benefit, and write it down. Now, you may or may not know this, but Social Security can only pay out what it collects in payroll taxes from current workers. Right now, the trust fund covers the gap between what comes in and what goes out. But that trust fund is on track to hit zero in 2033. It's just 7 years from now. And when it does, Social Security can only send you what it's collecting, which is about 77 cents on the dollar. So take your number and multiply it by 0.77. That's your check. No vote required. Those cuts are automatic. And so if your check is $2,200 a month, that drops to $1,694. That's $500 a month, gone, $6,000 a year for the rest of your life. Not to mention the value of your dollar by then. Because when a government is $136 trillion in the hole and can't cut its way out, there's really only one move left: print more dollars. And every dollar they print makes the ones in your pocket worth a little less. So that $1,694 by 2033 might buy just what $1,200 buys today. You get hit on both sides. And that is the difference between debt and insolvency. When you're in debt, you make adjustments. When you're insolvent, the adjustments are made for you automatically. So here's something to consider making a serious priority. If you don't have an income source that covers that gap, real estate cash flow, maybe a side business, something that doesn't depend on a government promise, you have 7 years to build one. Now, that's not panic, that's active defense. And if you're at a loss for where to start, grab a copy of the Inflation Defense Manual. I made it easy and uploaded it for you at inflationdefense.com. Now, the question financial television keeps failing to address, if the government is insolvent, how do they keep paying their bills? Well, like I said, they print it. And when I stop to think about that, really stop to think about it, tell me if this infuriates you the way it does me. Because you and I, we're held to a completely different standard. If you can't pay your bills, nobody cares why. Good reason, bad reason, doesn't matter. They're going to sue you for non-payment. They'll garnish your wages. They'll wreck your credit. You'll work 2 jobs, 3 jobs trying to catch up. You'll cut everything. You'll sell things you love. You'll make real sacrifices if you have any moral compass or sense of responsibility. And if that doesn't work, bankruptcy. Public record follows you for a decade. Well, the government doesn't deal with any of that. They just print more money. Your debt destroys your life. Their debt destroys your purchasing power. Same result though, you get poorer. The only difference is when you do it, there are consequences. When they do it, there's inflation. Can you imagine what your life would look like if you could just print money to pay your bills? Wouldn't that be something? That would be a dream for us, but it's a reality for them. So here's what's happening. The government collects $5.2 trillion in revenue each year. It spends $7.3 trillion. So to cover the difference, it borrows. And when nobody else wants to buy the bonds, the Fed steps in and essentially prints the money to buy them. The interest on that borrowing just hit $1.2 trillion a year. That's dead money. It can't build roads, it can't fund defense, it can't prop up Social Security. 23 cents of every dollar collected goes to interest on past decisions. And they can't stop it, because if they stop borrowing, they can't pay the bills. So they keep borrowing, they keep printing, and the dollar keeps quietly losing its value. 3% a year, 5% a year, who knows what it really is, because you never see a bill for it. Your groceries just cost more, your insurance goes up, housing becomes more and more unaffordable. Doesn't matter where you choose to spend, your money just continues to buy less and less and less. You're funding the government's insolvency one grocery trip at a time. So here's the second thing I checked tonight. Open your bank app, look at your savings rate, subtract 3% for inflation, and honestly, with gas up 32% since the war started, real inflation is probably a lot higher. But if your real return is under 1%, your cash is doing exactly what I just described. It's melting. And by the way, if you have a fixed rate mortgage, you already own one of the best defenses against exactly what I just described. Your payment, it stays the same, while the dollars you pay it with get cheaper every year. The people who paid off their mortgage to be safe, they gave up that advantage. But if you sleep better at night, maybe it's worth it. You'll get no argument from me. But just understand that in an inflationary environment, strategic debt is a fortress. Not reckless debt, strategic debt that produces cash flow. That's inflation arbitrage. Central banks, they understand this arbitrage very clearly. The same institutions that manage currencies for a living. They bought 863 tons of gold last year. And 95% of central banks surveyed plan to buy more this year. And they're not buying gold because it's shiny or because it's trendy. They're buying it because they can read the same balance sheet that I just showed you. And now that you've seen it, what are you going to buy to hedge against this inflation? Your financial advisor tells you to play it safe and keep your money in a savings or some other low yield bearing account earning maybe 4%. Well, the people who actually manage the money, central banks, are converting their reserves into gold. Family offices, per the BlackRock Global Family Office Survey last year, and Harvard, per the Harvard Management Company Annual Report last year, and Yale, their equivalent report. And without getting too deep into why I'm mentioning all of them, I'm doing it because I'm talking about the smartest money in the country. They've got more than 80% of their portfolios allocated to real assets and alternatives. because they've seen the balance sheet too. So pay attention to what the people who understand money are actually doing, not what they're telling you to do. Now, if this feels like, Matt, business as usual, this is a big nothing burger, I know all about this. Well, why did the government's own auditor refuse to certify the books for the 29th year in a row? Why did David Walker use the word insolvent for the first time in his career? And why did they release this report the day after Jerome Powell's press conference, when every financial outlet in the country was still covering the Fed's decision and the war's impact on the Fed's decision? Government reports have scheduled windows. But when the most alarming financial document the Treasury has ever produced gets zero coverage during wall-to-wall war footage, the effect is the same whether it was planned or not. Nobody saw it. This isn't new. This is a government playbook. Remember East Palestine, Ohio? A train full of toxic chemicals poisons an entire town. And every network in America was covering UFO balloons that week. $2 million per missile to shoot down hobby balloons while Americans drank contaminated water. In 2023, leaked documents showed Homeland Security was pressuring social media companies to suppress speech. When did that story land? Right in the middle of TikTok bans and culture war fights. Everyone was arguing about wokeness. Nobody read the actual DHS documents. And that same year, the FBI quietly admitted they ignored dozens of warnings before January 6th. They released that report right in the middle of Trump indictment coverage. Nobody noticed. Same playbook, every time. Something ugly happens, something shiny shows up so you don't look too closely. Except this time, it's not a town in Ohio or a buried FBI report. It's $136 trillion, and it's your Social Security check. You've been around long enough to know that when nobody's talking about something, that's usually when you should be paying the most attention. Now, I can't prove this last part, but here's where I think this is heading. I don't think we're heading for a dramatic collapse. I think we're heading for a slow melt. 3 to 5% purchasing power erosion every year for the next decade at least. Quiet enough that most people won't notice until their savings buys half of what it used to. And by the time the water is boiling, it's too late to jump out of the pot. That's why I'm talking about this now. So you can keep your retirement plan built on the promises of a government that just reported $136 trillion in obligations and hope they figure it out before 2033. Or you can spend this weekend doing what central banks are already doing, building a position in assets that don't depend on anyone's solvency but your own. And if you think gold is going to be a part of that plan, I pulled out this video right here for you to watch next. Because, precious metals seem like they're becoming more and more of the go-to during this specific uncertainty around this economy. But it's not bulletproof. Losses can be had the moment you buy gold. And I don't want you to experience that. So watch this right here before you make your next purchase. God loves you, and so do I. Take care.